What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Mohawk Motors. My name is Jason. Today we're getting back to work on the 6-liter LQ4 engine for the blue crew cab swap. Let me show you where we're at in this project. Now today we're going to be doing our last little bits of prep and then cleaning and getting ready to reassemble. And the first thing we need to do is get our piston rings off the pistons, check the gap, and then adjust as necessary. This is going to be a twin turbo engine. I'm going to give this one all of it. So I'm going to open my piston ring gap up on the top ring and the second ring if necessary. I'm going to measure them first and then adjust as needed. So let me show you how to get these piston rings on and off, and then how to check your piston ring gap, and then how to adjust them. Okay, so my first piston here, this is piston for number 1 cylinder. I need to get the top ring off, and I need to get the second ring. Now, your top ring and your second ring are going to be worn slightly differently, so you need to make sure you get them back in the place that they came out of. Now, if you have a piston ring removal tool, that's the ideal tool to use for this. I have a snap ring plier that I'm going to use. You want to just expand your piston ring nice and evenly and gently. So you can get it out of that ringland. I have seen people that, pop one side loose and then walk the rings out. You can do it that way. It is not the ideal method. See, there's our top ring. Now on these LS piston rings, they have a little dimple. And the dimple side goes towards the combustion chamber, towards the top of the piston. The other side is just flat. So there's my top ring. Here's my second ring. I'm going to remove this one the same way. There we go, there's my second ring. Same thing. The little dimple on the ring goes up towards the combustion chamber. So now the next thing we need to do, and as you can see, my rings move nice and freely in the piston ring grooves. I'm still going to take the piston over to the parts washer and clean it off with the soft brush and everything. Get this cleaned up too while I have it this far apart. But if you had a ring that was stuck or tight, now would be a good time to clean your piston ring grooves out. And you can do that with a piece of old broken piston ring, or if you have a small soft file or something like that, that's the correct size for that groove. But remember, you don't want to damage the piston, which is aluminum. So you need something that's the correct size. You don't want to be squeezing something in there or banging it around, or use something like a wire brush that's going to open that dimension up and let your ring move back and forth. So let's take our rings here and get them slid into the number 1 bore in the engine. Okay, so we've got our number 1 cylinder. We've got our top piston ring for the number 1 cylinder. Now you want to wipe it off. Make sure you don't have any schmutz or dirt, anything like that on there. As clean as you can get it. Give your cylinder bore a little wipe. Make sure you don't have anything in there. Then you're going to take your piston ring, put it in perpendicular, and then turn it to how it's supposed to be. Now, if you don't have a piston ring depth gauge, that's okay. You can use your piston. And this is part of why I left the oil ring on my piston. So I'll know that I can simply push my piston ring down, and when my oil ring touches, that ring is square in the cylinder bore, exactly how it's supposed to be. Now, I need to get my feeler gauges and measure my piston ring gap. Okay, team. Now we can see at the very top center of the cylinder is our piston ring end gap. Right here. Now, when your piston ring is square in the bore, that's the gap you're measuring. Now, how you set your end gap depends on your application. There's not a standard ring gap that you set for a turbo application. There's not a standard ring gap that you set for nitrous. The best way, and in my opinion, how I like to set mine is, what is your application? That gives you a multiplying factor, and you multiply that factor by your bore diameter. So in my experience, I like 7/1000ths of an inch of ring gap per inch of bore diameter. So you can use that formula. Just an example here, I know that the bore diameter of this 6-liter engine is 4 inches. So I would multiply 4 times 0.007. That works out to 28 thousandths. So I want to run my ring gaps at 28 thousandths. So I've got my 10 thousandths and my 18 thousandths feeler gauge here stacked together. They're clean. They're laying exactly flat on each other. I want to see if these ring gaps are that big. So with my feeler gauge right in that gap, going up and down, it's just the tiniest amount of drag. It's actually maybe a 1/2 thousandth loose, but that's okay. I'd rather be a little bit too loose than too tight. As your engine is running, and especially under a load, let's say you're under a wide open throttle situation, the piston rings get hot. And as they get hot, they expand like any metal does. Well, they can't expand outwards because the cylinder does not get any larger. Well, it does, but it's a minuscule amount. So the only way the ring can expand on this diameter is by pushing these ends closer together. Now, if they push close enough together that they touch and actually push against each other, that'll make the piston ring stick in the cylinder bore, and then that will damage the piston, or it could even totally destroy the engine. It just depends on if you get lucky or not. But that ring gap is, I mean, honestly, it's perfect. It's exactly where I want it to be. If anything, it's just a tiny, tiny little bit loose, but that's okay because that gives me a little insurance when I'm putting the boost into this thing. So next I'll check the second ring. I'm gonna run the same amount of gap in my first ring and my second ring. So they'll both be gapped to 28 thousandths. Now, when it's time to get your piston ring out, you remove it in the exact opposite process of when you put it in. So the gapped end, pull that out of the bore, and then slide that ring out. Got all our piston rings checked for gap. Out of all 8 cylinders, the top ring on number 5 was the only one that was tight. It was at about 27 thousandths. So I opened that up with a little filing, chamfered the edges. That one's good to go. Everything else, all the other piston rings were right at 28 thousandths or even a little bit more, which is right where I want them. So next step is clean the block. I've got the pistons and rods all over there cleaned up. They're drying. I'm gonna hose the engine down with some gunk, get it as clean as I possibly can, and then we'll be able to get started on reassembling this thing. I do want to show you all my pistons. Right here, this is the number 3 piston. You'll notice it's still dirty. My goal was not to make this look like a new piston. My goal was to rinse any of the dirt, grime, chunks, or hunks of stuff that had fallen on it while it was sitting on the workbench off. That's pretty much it. I don't expect them to be new pistons. There's no sense in me putting my time into making them look like new pistons. I'm trying to get this thing back together. So it'll dry, and then hopefully by then the engine will be done being cleaned, and then we can start putting it back together. Okay, so small miscalculation on my part. You probably, hopefully you can tell from the time lapse, I used the gunk and hot water to get all the heavy stuff off, and then I went back with brake parts cleaner and did not have enough brake parts cleaner to finish getting everything cleaned up. So I had to take a step backwards and hose it down with WD-40 to keep anything from flash rusting overnight. So I think that's gonna be it for this video. Tomorrow I'll run and grab some brake clean, and that way I'll be able to do my final clean on the engine block here, and then we can start putting this thing back together. But that's gonna be a separate video. Thanks so much for watching. I really hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something. I hope this helps in your project if you're doing something similar. And I really, really appreciate all of you that have subscribed. And if you haven't already and you'd like to, that really helps me out, and I would be grateful as well. But until next time, take care.